I'm Ashton from Blockwest Capital for Investment Pitch Media, and today on the Crypto Coin Show we have Colin Butler, the Global Head of Institutional Capital at Polygon. Colin, thank you so much for taking the time, and pleasure to speak with you today.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks, Ashton.
You're very welcome. So much has happened since our team has spoken to Polygon almost a year ago now. You guys have completely continued to expand. I'm very impressed with the partnerships that Polygon is making and the growth compared to some of the other blockchains, and even so, just getting in a lot of huge companies, some of the biggest companies in the world, understanding the value proposition from Web3 and utilizing Polygon's technology to bring value to their users and to the world. I would love to start off our conversation with just a little bit on yourself and how you got involved with the institutional side at Polygon, and then we'll dive into the Polygon specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick background on me. I spent about 20 years on Wall Street with various positions within investment banks, from equity sales and trading to investment banking. I came into crypto a little under a year ago. Really started reading things like the Bitcoin Standard and Masari and getting down the rabbit hole. And at some point, I think everybody that goes on this journey, everyone has their own story, right? And it almost like takes over your entire body, where you just you feel like possessed, like you have to work in this business because you think like, oh my God, like there's X, Y, and Z, and it's just so much better than kind of traditional rails, like orders of magnitude better. But really what it is, I mean, everyone has their own reasons, right? It's democratization. But one of the things that really stuck with me was that really like the alignment of interests, where the builders of the network, maintainers of the network, and the users of the network were all aligned, right? There's no more kind of misalignment where there's a certain small cadre of people at the very top with kind of all the power and control of the data, and then there's a bunch of people down here that are essentially providing those people with high incomes and yet not extracting a lot of value out of it. So that was kind of like one of the core thoughts that made me say, okay, this is a paradigm shift for the way human beings interact. I mean, it's not a small vision, right? And my personal angle, because of my history, was really that institutional capital side, because I had good relationships with a lot of the hedge funds and pension funds and asset managers out there. So when it came time for those folks to think about how they're going to interact with the blockchain, that was kind of a natural focal point and transition for me to really marry those two, bring those two worlds together, which I think Polygon has done a really, really good job of.
Very cool. I'm interested in hearing more about the institutional side, because I've seen so much on the major partnerships and the gaming fund and the tens of thousands of dApps that are now working on Polygon, but I haven't seen too much about the institutional capital side, but I know that there's a lot going on, and you have the insights, so I'm excited to dive into that. But for the people that they've seen Polygon a while back, or they're just learning about it, from when it started, you sort of mentioned there at the beginning, you get that feeling that's like it overtakes you, and you like just feel like this is the future, and I think you and me are both have that conviction that it is, and I felt that in like Bitcoin in 2014, 15, and that was before the smart contracts and all of that stuff, and I had no idea what was to come. But even when Polygon started to where it is now, it's completely evolved and revolutionized itself over and over again. It's completely different from when it started. From where Polygon is at right now, how would you explain to somebody who is sort of familiar with Bitcoin and Ethereum, what is the paradigm shift and what makes Polygon different and great?
Yeah, absolutely. I think evolution is a great word, because that's really what it was. Polygon really started as a way to get developers building into this ecosystem with the existing technology. And at first, there wasn't really anything. Ethereum came out with smart contracts. It really quickly ran up against a scalability wall, right? Gas fees were becoming very expensive. It was very challenging to actually make meaningful app layer, execution layer products on Ethereum, given its restrictions, right? It's kind of like low block time, 12 to 13 seconds to create a block. Like all the challenges that Ethereum faced wouldn't really allow that to be the sole enabler of mass adoption. And so Polygon came along. It's really Sandeep and JD and the other folks that are the co-founders of Polygon. And they said, we need to get something out to market right now that is user-friendly and just allows these developers that see the vision that you and I see to get started and just start creating. And so really what they came out with was proof of stake. And it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was not the most elegant technology, right? There's a lot of like kind of other startups around that era that came out with like these math professors said, this is the most elegant technology. And some of the stuff they created is really cool. But what Polygon was really focused on was always user adoption. It's like, how do I get something in someone's hands to where they can get up and running and it's easy to use and it's very functional? It's kind of like the workhorse. And I think that by listening to the customers, listening to the developers, right, the people that we wanted to build out this ecosystem, the founders were able to create that thing that was just very functional. And I think that's why there was a community that coalesced around Polygon really quickly, right? It's all very organic. It wasn't sponsored by a headline venture capital firm in the United States, like some of the other startups of that generation were. It was really organic. It was really like Polygon, a very small team going developer to developer and saying, what do you need? What do you want to see in order to develop the blockchain? And then kind of incorporating those ideas and features. And I think that really resonated with a lot of people. And the result that you see from that is the early, kind of call it them BD wins, right? Business development wins. It would be like OpenSea and Aave and some of the other kind of early crypto native applications building on Polygon. And from there, almost surprisingly so, you saw an ecosystem spring up where it was like the first 100 dApps were like, oh my, wow, like there's 100 dApps building on Polygon. Like that was exciting. You know, this was not even almost like 2 years ago. And now you see a number, right? Like Alchemy would say there's 53,000 dApps. And it's like seeing that is pretty cool. So what Polygon really became was, there was actually a great podcast somebody turned me on to. It was like really blockchains as cities. So if you think of like Ethereum as kind of like the downtown Manhattan where there's very limited, call it space, and there's kind of all these challenges in terms of like infrastructure, but everybody wants to be there and prices are very high. Polygon really came around to try and enable that, like in terms of accessibility to other people, right? So that was why, you know, that we created this side chain with kind of the check-ins. But ultimately, through that journey, you know, with the full recognition that POS has been very successful, there's still a lot of people building on it. It works very well, and it's a much loved product by the crypto community. But even back when the founders started POS, they realized that there was more of a final iteration of blockchain scaling. And so they said, listen, like we think Ethereum is where it's at. We want to enable the world to come to Ethereum. Everybody from banks to big corporations, you know, you've seen all the big announcements, right? From, you know, call it like Instagram and Robinhood and Reddit. Probably some that I can't mention. You saw JP Morgan put up a public trade on Polygon the other day. But really the holy grail, as Vitalik would say, would be zero knowledge rollups for scaling Ethereum, right? And so even early on, the founders had in the back of their minds that proof of stake was potentially an interim solution for certain people that needed a very high level of security. And so what wound up happening was Polygon, as they continued to build the ecosystem and proof of stake, Polygon is the second highest ecosystem outside of Ethereum. They also started focusing on the zero knowledge idea, which really it took the world multiple decades to figure out. Like the math behind zero knowledge or ZK is incredibly difficult. So Polygon went up spending $1 billion to buy kind of the most promising zero knowledge technologies with the idea that was the holy grail of blockchain scaling. And we could ultimately provide that to everybody if they wanted that is already built on Polygon. So, you know, there's kind of various trade-offs in the blockchain, right? There's the blockchain trilemma, there's kind of security versus decentralization. What this allows us to do is to provide a full suite of scaling solutions really for Ethereum for everybody that needs to build on the blockchain in kind of whatever use case, right? For a bank, it's high security. For a gaming platform, it's more like, I would say, speed. But we want to, you know, Mihailo, one of our co-founders, is letting 1,000 flowers bloom. It's really like we wanted to provide whatever it is that somebody needed to build on this with the idea that we would gain large-scale adoption. Wow. Right? So when I say large-scale adoption, like the end goal is like onboarding the next billion users. But it really starts with the developers, right?
For sure. And I love that analogy about Manhattan. And it's hard to fit 1 billion people into Manhattan. But, you know, the Polygon ecosystem continues to sort of expand out and and grow out to those outer city limits. And it's great to see. And $1 billion is a lot. And I'm really curious, on the insights of the institutional capital side. You mentioned venture capital there. You mentioned at the beginning about hedge funds, and often we hear on the Bitcoin side, institutions are like secretly buying Bitcoin, or they don't really give away their positions as well as some of the retail or crypto traders that are like touting it on the internet. So what's sort of the inside relationship that you can share with how do the institutions work on the capital side with Polygon?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a range of interaction. I think that, first off, from speaking with the heads of a lot of these, digital asset heads within these organizations, I would say that the idea that they're secretly buying Bitcoin is somewhat, that's not what I would focus on, let's just say. I think there's a much bigger picture out there. And I think what the bigger picture looks like, I personally find it very exciting. I hope the listeners on the podcast do as well. But what it means to me is the idea that you can disintermediate large traditional institutions that are just taking a piece of every transaction and not adding the value that I think that potentially they're getting compensated for, if that makes sense. So think of the idea that if you're a retailer in any form, you could be small, you could be large, you could be a mom and pop, you could be Walmart. If you go through the Visa and MasterCard payment rails, you wind up paying 2 to 3% to various intermediaries, from banks to Visa and MasterCard. And then you get the idea that, well, Bitcoin comes along, it's a peer-to-peer transaction. You could, in theory, cut out those intermediaries, right? That was kind of the holy grail, I think, for the first people, the early people in crypto. Like, you don't need these banks anymore. You don't need these intermediaries. But it took a long time to actually build out the infrastructure to facilitate that vision. I still see it being built out. It's happening in the background. It's just not very public because the banks and exchanges and all the other large financial players are not ready to announce it, to take it live, because it's not complete, right? They can't go out and say, we're building this technology. They don't want to set expectations. But the reality is, there's a couple major reasons why they adopt. And one of them would be cost savings in the case of banks, right? There's, call it like when you need to settle a transaction, it winds up going through a very archaic, kind of creaky process of multiple parties doing sometimes manual work on a transaction. It works fairly well. You don't necessarily need all that creaky infrastructure. I say creaky because it was built over the course of decades. So the vision for the blockchain, for that specific use case, is to have just one easy to use, reliable solution that takes out a lot of that traditional infrastructure. And then your focus for finance, and I think maybe even more in bigger picture, like you could think banks could save tens of millions in costs potentially by settling on the blockchain. That's a clear use case. But by tokenizing assets, some people, there's all kinds of numbers out there, but one that I don't mind using is $700 trillion of assets that could eventually you probably heard this before, right? There's a range. But you could think of like all these assets that can go on chain, from fixed income to derivatives. I don't want to get too technical. Stocks, bonds, gold, eventually real estate. Like these can be tokenized, they can be fractionalized. But really what that allows for is the people that provide these products can distribute them to a wider range of potential customers by taking them on chain. And so for them, I talked about banks solving for the cost side. This actually increases revenue for the large, call it asset managers of the world. Because now, instead of just a very specific subset of qualified purchasers, you can shift to accredited investors and a wider audience of people that can now have access to your products. So if you think of the idea that formerly only wealthy, rich individuals had access to these high return, kind of very secure, best of breed investment products, what I think tokenization can do is democratize that in some way, where you can take the less fortunate among us, right? The people that didn't start out at a certain level in society, and put those amazing products into the hands of those people, not just wealthy, privileged individuals. So I think those are a couple of compelling ideas. And I would say why it's so exciting is because this stuff is happening, right? Like we're all kind of living through this crypto winter, this sort of bear market. But the reality is institutions move inch by inch, but they're moving like an unstoppable train going forward. So what you're going to see in the pipeline in the next 6 to 12 months are a lot of major announcements. And to people kind of on the outside, it's going to be like, wow, like where did this come from? But I'm telling you, like, this is happening. It's not stopping. Product market fit has really been found for this industry in the background, right? It's very quiet right now, but it's going to be very public at some point in the not too distant future, in my opinion, and it's going to be very, very powerful.
That's very exciting. And tokenization of the financial assets, the market is just so big to be able to tokenize the entire stock market and derivatives and real world assets that you can tokenize the world. And the current market cap of cryptocurrency is just like a little tiny pinch compared to what it can become. And I saw news in the past year or two about JP Morgan and Consensus trying to utilize like sort of like Ethereum smart contract technology to tokenize like the stock market. I feel like Polygon would be an even better use case for this. And so where do you start? It's like you want to tokenize the whole world, you want to tokenize all the financial assets. What are sort of the low-hanging fruits there, and how do we get the financial world to start using Web3 technology?
Yeah, the short answer is you start small, right? You start with test cases. Everybody on this call could look up the most recent trade done with JP Morgan and Monetary Authority of Singapore as kind of one example, right? It's a very small trade, but it is meaningful in terms of the concept that it's really opened up a Pandora's box. Like, we can do this. But I don't think you necessarily start there. I think the first use cases in finance are going to be tokenization of funds. Like, I think that's the most natural sort of on-ramp for this idea. You could think of the idea that KKR and Securitize tokenized one of the funds in KKR. I think you're going to see a lot more of that in the future. And I think that's just the entree. And then over time, I think you're going to see tokenization of less liquid things. And when I say over time, again, like, people are working on this stuff very diligently, putting a lot of resources towards it. So it's happening now. It's being built now for the announcements that we will all see come to the public in the next several quarters. And then you progressively get deeper. Right. The thing about like equities markets and fixed income markets they actually work very well. Like, they're very efficient. So I think those will be potentially the last to be tokenized because the use case isn't quite as strong. But in the meantime, you're going to see the on-ramps come to the public. You're going to see many of the major firms make these announcements. That's where it's going to start. And at some point, I think this is one of those cases where it kind of comes slowly and then all at once. And that's the way it's going to feel like to most people. To me, it feels like it's all happening because we're involved in a lot of these conversations, like, as they build it. And so to me, like, I have never been busier. To me, there's just like things are happening so quickly. But I realize that I sit in a seat that's kind of privileged, that gets to see the airplane as it's being built, not just when it gets launched. But I would tell everybody on this call that the airplane is being built. It's going to be like really, really cool to see the launch over the coming months and years. And it's huge, by the way. I mean, the trillions and trillions of dollars of institutional capital are all very focused on this industry. Just, again, starting small and going inch by inch. That's why it feels like probably to an outsider that it's not happening.
Yeah, that's very exciting. And even just saying, in the next quarters, it's like, that's really quickly, especially in crypto. And like, I don't expect the bull market to have already taken off by then. Like, it's just around the corner. Bitcoin moves sort of slow. And what you mentioned there also about how it feels like it's going really slowly at first, and then it's going to ramp up sort of all at once. I feel like the equity markets and for Bitcoin products at least, it felt really slow. It was like years and years of like rejecting this Bitcoin ETF, and like no digital assets are like allowed on the stock market, and like they're still rejecting things. But I feel like there's going to be a turning point where all of that's gonna, once some big event happens, then it will all sort of be accepted, and I feel like Polygon will be like a major part of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we're well positioned to be an integral part of a lot of people that are building on the blockchain. But I would say that it won't be one thing. Like, I'd say that when it feels like it comes all at once, it will be the result of years of very, very hard work for individuals that get no credit, and it all happened behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. And leaning into 2023, I know you're super busy, and even if the market's sort of going sideways or down, I feel like all the builders are building more than ever. What are some of the things that we might expect from your side of the team at Polygon, in the next quarter or two?
Yeah, you don't even have to stick with my side of the team. So some of the big themes are the rollout of our ZK EVM, zero knowledge EVM, on mainnet. So basically that will make it like fully functional, publicly ready to go. That to me actually does represent a paradigm shift in blockchain technology. Mm-hmm. So really what it does is, in the past you were always reliant on a bridge. And what ZK really does is just submits proofs back to Ethereum. So it's really like, I think one of the founders on our team that was a progenitor of that product really had it in his mind that this was the biggest thing to happen to the blockchain since Ethereum and since smart contracts were created. Wow. So it's a pretty huge deal. In my mind, it really opens up that financial vertical, because financial people that are, you're going to send like trillions of dollars in assets on blockchain. You're going to need a very high level of security to do that, and ZK EVM offers that really for the first time, right? Call it like an unhackable bridge. Mm-hmm. A lot of there's so many interesting things happening across the space. I would include gaming as one of those. Mm-hmm. So Polygon's CEO comes from the gaming side, right? He came from YouTube. He was head of gaming at YouTube, and so what we have in the pipeline is kind of those really, like, prior to this, you had those kind of play to earn games that were a little bit Ponzi-ish. Who knows what the actual use case was? But what we think gains real adoption is like the Web3 Call of Duty that people really want to play, that AAA game that has that kind of organic adoption. Only now you can own your own digital assets, right? You own your own skins, you own your own weaponry or whatever it is. We think that's a super compelling value proposition, and I think you're going to see like more that side of things in the first half of next year. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I can't talk about exciting future developments about what we call Web 2. Web 2 is everything that's not crypto. Like, Fortune 100 companies, right? Think of the most recent week as a case study. Mm-hmm. You're going to see more and more premier brands coming on chain and creating kind of metaverses and cool ecosystems. I think you're going to see announcement after announcement after announcement, because everybody has a strategy for that, and I think it's going to be really exciting as it rolls out.
That's very exciting, and yeah, I feel like a lot of these large brands they want to dip their toe in, but that sometimes they don't want to be the first one. And like now that we've seen some of these major companies, it's like everyone else is doing it. We better jump on before they get too far ahead. We need to catch up and like make sure that we're also experimenting at least with this technology. And I feel like 2023 is going to be the year for that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you don't want, like, a lot of people don't want to be the first one, but you definitely don't want to be the last one.
Exactly. Amazing. Colin, I'm really looking forward to the next year, and despite which direction the markets are going, I understand that Web3 is going to bring a lot of value to people that don't know anything about Web3, and that's what I'm very excited about, is driving more value through technology to people's everyday lives. So I really appreciate you taking the time to speak a little bit about what Polygon's been working on and the institutional side. I'm learning here. And is there any other information that people could learn about the institutional side, or other ways that they can just follow along with Polygon and stay in touch with the latest updates?
Yeah, absolutely. I try to make it a habit of regularly posting my insights on Twitter, Real Crypto Colin, for those of you that are interested, because I like to communicate like kind of what I see internally. I don't want people to lose the excitement, because crypto is here to stay. And from my personal perspective, it's never been more exciting. Mm-hmm. So I really hope that everybody still feels that. They don't lose that in a lot of the noise that's kind of surrounding the industry right now. because I just hope that everybody stays along for the ride, because I think it's going to be, it's only going up from here, in my personal opinion.
I completely agree, and I will leave the links to your platform and Polygon as well in the description box below. Thank you so much, Colin. Appreciate it. All the best with Polygon moving forward, and let's follow up in the near future.
My pleasure, Ashton. Great to speak. Thanks.